All right. Hey guys, this is Matt Reed. Welcome to Dig In. Joel, my friend, his group's going to be taking a couple weeks off the next 6 weeks, so I'm going to have some guests. You guys know Jim Ward. He's one of our leaders at youth group. Welcome, Jim, from your home. Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So we are in Colossians. We are starting a new book today. We are in the book of Colossians, and we're going to be talking specifically today verses 1 through 23. And the thing about this book, just to give a little background information and context as we start talking about it, is that it's written by Paul to a church in a town called Colossae or something like that. And it's written to a church that he doesn't start. In fact, he doesn't actually even know them. He doesn't know these people. He just knows of them because he sent a guy named Epaphras to this church. Epaphras was actually from this town, but he sent him and Epaphras started this church. So what was going on is there's some things going on in the church, and Epaphras came to Paul to talk about it. So he comes to Paul and he discusses the church, and a lot of what he says is actually really good. He talks about things about the church being loving and caring for each other and stuff like that. But some of the stuff that Epaphras had to say concerned Paul, and that's where this book comes up. That's where this discussion happens. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the book, but that's just kind of context. There's this false teaching that's been going on in the church. So Paul writes this letter to this church in Colossae. So, hey, Jim, you read the book, right? You read the section that we're going through, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. What are some of the things that just kind of stand out to you, kind of run through once you read it, versus 1 through 23, something that stood out to you?
Yeah, it's interesting because as I was reading through the first 23 verses, the one that stood out to me most was verse 10. So it says, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God.
So one of the things that kind of like, just to kind of bring you in, when we read Philippians, earlier in the book of Philippians, it was chapter 1, verses 27. It says, whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. So it's kind of reiterating that same thought here. So Paul's the writer of both these letters, and he's saying, live your life in a way that honors God. So go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, no, and I love that, and it speaks to me often every time I read it in passage. For me, as you think about, if you like to garden or you grow fruit trees or what have you, you know that you have to pull out the weeds and kind of tend to the garden and tend to the trees and
cut off
and really
some
just
weeds, branches.
Exactly, and really for those plants to grow, you kind of have to do that. And I think it reminds me of my own life and just being able to prune out the bad things and really get back to a place where we're loving God and being focused on him and his glory. And it's really important to take that step to evaluate the things that you are doing and saying and maybe the behaviors that you're engaging in and stop and reevaluate whether that's pleasing to God or not.
Yeah, and even the thoughts that you're having. So Jesus
100%.
talks about often that it's not just about your actions, it's about the thoughts behind them. So it's
100%.
important to make sure your thought life is also pleasing to God. Even if, Jim, you can't see or hear what I'm thinking, but God can. And you want your thoughts to be pleasing. The Bible talks about if you have hate for your brother, it's as if you've committed murder. So it's serious stuff. One of the things that stands out to me is that Paul is praying for these people, and he's even writing a letter, taking the time to write a letter to these people that he doesn't even know. But he's communicating to them that he values them. Even though he didn't start this church, he didn't know them. He only had heard of them through Epaphras, but he cared about them, and he wrote this letter to them, and he prayed for them. So it talks about ways that he prayed for them. He talks about praying for endurance and patience and and joyfulness. And he prays that they'll give thanks to the Father, who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in the kingdom of light. So like he's just praying these things that he wishes and wants for them. Yeah, that just really stood out to me. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's something we should be all doing for ourselves, right? And praying for our friends and our loved ones, and maybe even folks that we don't know, and just sharing our love for them and being able to say that God's glory, and we want you to bear and sort of reap those fruit and just change the sort of reevaluate and change the way that you sort of carry and conduct yourselves, and I just I love the way that Paul kind of frames it that way.
Yeah. He also prays for them to receive the knowledge of his will. Like he prays for that. And I think this is important because Paul is about to, in the next few verses, 15 to 23, really lay out the gospel message and what it is to be a follower of Christ. And he's going to use this particular section to bounce back to later in the book when he talks about false teachings that are out there that are in this church. So I think that's important that he's praying about that. And then, those next verses 15 through 23, it's really this poem, or it's a hymn. It's thought to have been either a poem or hymn that was circulated through the churches. And Paul, in this, whether Paul wrote it or not, I don't think so, but it's possible. Really just lays out what it means to follow Christ. And it says in verse 18, and he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that everything he might have supremacy. So some of the false teachings were that Jesus is just a good teacher, or different things like that. There was really two groups. There was the Jewish Christians, and then there was these Greek Christians who had kind of been brought into a very Jewish culture type of church, but that it was not, but they kind of brought their own stuff, and they had this philosophy and stuff like that was seeping into the church, as well as the Jewish Christians they had this legalistic mindset where, you had to do certain things to get to God. And Paul is going to, talk about that stuff later. But the big thing for me is that he is setting up that Christ is the head of the church and we are the body. Other passages in the Bible talk about, the church being the body. So your hand does this and your foot does this, and everybody's got an important role to play. But if we don't put Christ at the head, we're going to go off track.
Yep. 100%. And I think we've all experienced situations where we don't put Christ, sort of at the head, and we go down a path, right? We go down bad paths. We make bad decisions. We have thoughts that we wouldn't ever want anybody to hear, right? And verbalize. So yeah, every time you sort of make that move and take God away from the head, Jesus from the head, it's going to take us down bad paths.
Yeah, and that happens by different things, you decide, I think this is best for my life. You read the Bible and it says you should do this or you shouldn't do that, or it gives you, suggestions, different things like that. And you go, you know what? I'm going to do it my way. And I don't know about you, Jim. I've done it my way. I still do it my way from time to time. And it doesn't work. It just doesn't.
No.
I have caused other people and myself so much hurt just by going, you know what? I know better than you, God. And it's sad. I hate to say it, but it happens. And I think it's something that we need to battle our entire lives. Who's in control? Is it me or is it God?
Yeah.
So
yeah, you get that feeling inside of you. You just know that it's not pleasing to God, and I think he's trying to tell you something, right? And you can either listen or you can not listen, and
yep. And then
you're really kind of at that choice.
deal with the consequences of that.
Yep.
So My daughter was watching a movie today, and it's Wits End. It's Adventures on Odyssey. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And it was a movie, actual VHS tape, so old school, and it had a room of consequences in it. Like Wit is like an inventor, and he invents these things. It's kind of crazy. You have to check it out sometime. But
Nice.
anyways, he invents his room of consequence, and there was like what they did could have caused all these different consequences. You know, what we do causes consequences, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And usually when we're not following what Christ has called us to do, the consequences aren't good. So,
And I would say those consequences sometimes are immediate and sometimes don't reveal themselves until some time has passed,
absolutely,
whether it be a month, a year, or even 10 years or more.
absolutely, definitely.
Yeah.
So there's a lot in this section. It's a longer passage than we have been doing. This is about 23 verses. We've
Yeah.
been doing about 9 to 11. So this is, we weren't able to talk about everything in this section, but I want to encourage you guys to read through this passage every day. I have the questions that you can check in the description of the YouTube link, where you can answer a different question every day, and we'll talk about it on Sunday. But yeah, so the verses that we're reading this week are Colossians chapter 1, verses 1 through 23. And I hope to see you on Sunday. And I'll talk to you, Jim, either next week or maybe I'll talk to somebody else. I'm not sure yet. We'll have to talk about that later. All right.
Sounds good.
See
Love
you
it.
guys later.
Bye, everybody.